Good afternoon. Thank you for coming out to this event today. We have it every year, as someone mentioned. And I want to thank, first of all, Frau Nicom and the monks, the good monks here at the Wat for hosting this event. The good ladies from the Wat too, I hear that they're preparing some snacks for us. And our speakers, Dr. Konsakt, Venerable Kongyan, Lee. They've said almost everything we need to hear, I think. So I'm a little bit perplexed what to say. They've given us such a good background of mindfulness. So I think I'm going to speak a little bit about more from my tradition. I come from the Zen tradition. You may know that in Buddhism there are many schools of Buddhism. There's the Theravadan schools, which come from Southeast Asia. There are many schools throughout China. There's a Pure Land school of Buddhism. And in Japan, we find so many different schools. I think traditionally there were 13 different schools of Buddhism in Japan. But I'm representing Zen, which arose in China, but then was passed from China to Korea, to Japan, and now, of course, we find it here in the West as well, here in St. Louis. But first of all, regarding mindfulness, I think this is a gift that Buddhism has given to the West. In one way, it's common sense. It's purely common sense that we have to pay attention to what we're doing in our everyday life. I mean, that's common sense, and yet it's very difficult to do. It's surprisingly difficult to do, even if we have good teachers like Lee. So I think mindfulness, as we hear from John Kabat-Zinn, he's this mindfulness-based stress reduction. He's using it to reduce stress in life. And other ways, in my mind, this is freedom from the preoccupations we have with the past and the future. And I've often spoken about this at this event, but let me just say quickly that human beings, like us, and everybody else we know, we can only think either of the past or the future. It is simply impossible to think of the moment now. And the reason I say that is that the instant we perceive something, a sight, a sound, a smell, a taste, a thought, that thing that we've perceived is already past. A sound, for example. In that nanosecond between the time you perceive the sound, you recognize the sound is already gone. So in essence, we are thinking about a memory of that perception. And yet we can become preoccupied, even obsessed about things in the past, even though it's impossible to change the past or hold on to it. Something somebody said to us, or something somebody didn't say to us, et cetera, et cetera. We can become obsessed, well, let's say at least preoccupied by things in the past. Even though we cannot change the past, nor can we hold on to it. And likewise, the future, we can think about the future. You can imagine what kind of tasty things they're preparing for us this afternoon. You can think about what you want to do when this event is over this afternoon or this evening. Tomorrow's Sunday. We can plan all we want for things that are going to happen in the future as we imagine they're going to happen, but on a daily basis, we have that experience that things often do not go the way we want them to. We're planning to meet somebody, or we're planning to do this or that, but oftentimes things don't go the way we want them to. This is a fact of life. And so mindfulness, in my mind, but especially from the Zen tradition, is to let go of the past. It's not to say we can't learn from the past. We can reflect on it. If we have to make changes, we can correct them. It's not to say that we shouldn't plan for the future. We can make plans to meet somebody and so on, but we have to be ready. We have to be flexible and take things as they come. And so mindfulness in the Zen tradition is really to bring our attention to the moment now, to live in the moment now. And the thing is, though, that's easier said than done. So Buddhist practice is, as Lee was helping us to realize, is to bring our attention to the moment now. But two things come to my mind when I think about mindfulness in practical terms. One is driving. I think everybody here is able, except one or two, I think one or two people cannot drive. But most of us are able to drive a vehicle. Am I correct? Yes. I was looking online, 40,000 people die in traffic accidents every year here in America. Not to mention people who are injured or whose cars are destroyed and their life is upset because somebody probably wasn't paying attention. We all know that it's important to pay attention when we're driving, that we shouldn't be texting, right? We shouldn't be speaking to people on the telephone and so on. So it just seems to me a practical example of the importance of being mindful. That's not to guarantee that there will not be an accident, but defensive driving and paying attention to what you're doing will probably go a long way in helping that it doesn't happen. Another thing that's important in our life is the eating. But we know that here in America, again, I was looking online, 40% of Americans are considered to be obese. And 9 or 10% of people are unable to eat enough. They have eating disorders. So now there's quite a bit of talk in my tradition, in the Zen tradition, of mindful eating, of learning how to eat enough, but not too much. So these are important ways, in my mind, just very practical ways, that people can use mindfulness in their everyday life to lead a better, more mindful life. But what I'd like to do today is to raise some questions, because I'm not sure if mindfulness and what we call Zazen are the same. I don't know. I want to pose that question. Zazen is the word we use for meditation in the Zen school. So I want to pose some questions to you. And later on we can speak about this if you have questions about this. And I want to start by a parable from the time of the Buddha called the parable of the poisoned arrow. How many people are familiar with the poisoned arrow? I think it's quite commonly spoken about. But first, let me tell you about a proverb from Japan. Japan is the culture in which I trained. There's a short proverb. A person chasing a deer doesn't see the mountains. Do you understand this proverb? A person who's chasing a deer, well, in common terms, that's a deer hunter, right? A deer hunter doesn't see the mountains. So this is an example of someone who has a goal, who has an intention. They want to be mindful, for example. In the case of the deer hunter, imagine that you're a deer hunter. And I don't want to offend anybody's sensibilities here. If you don't like hunting deer, you can think of some other example. But a deer hunter, if that person, he or she, happens to see a deer, they cannot let go of of looking at the deer. Why? If they let go of looking at the deer is going to escape. And maybe that will be, for that day, that deer hunter will go home without any deer. So in the case of this proverb, someone who is chasing a deer doesn't care how high the mountains are or how low the valleys are. They are simply going to keep their attention on the deer. Understood? Their goal is to catch that deer. They're not going to let go of that. Otherwise, it's going to escape. Okay? So, back to the parable of the poison arrow. This comes from the time of the Buddha. And I think in the Theravadan tradition, they love these stories from the time of the Buddha. In my tradition, we don't hear that many of them, but here's a very famous story from the time of the Buddha. There was a man, and he had been taught how to meditate by the Buddha. He had had personal instruction from the Buddha. But when it came time to do the meditation, he found that it was very difficult to do what the Buddha said. Okay? He was having trouble being mindful, in other words. So he started thinking, why is it so difficult? And the more he thought, the more confused he became. He thought, we have the expression, did the chicken come first or did the egg come first? The more he thought, the more confused he became, and finally he said, I can't do it. I'm having that much trouble being mindful. So he went to the Buddha. He said, I'm just having great difficulty being mindful. What should I do? I want to quit. I want to quit being your disciple. So at that point, the Buddha gave the example of the poison arrow. So a young man, and I imagine he was a warrior, otherwise I'm not sure how this would have happened exactly. But one day, a poison arrow hit him in the chest. And his friends and relatives gathered around him and said, you have to let a doctor remove that arrow right away and put medicine on that, otherwise you're going to die. But the young man said, no, I have many questions to ask. First of all, before this arrow is removed, I want to know who shot that arrow. And I want to know who made that arrow. And I want to know what kind of wood is that shaft of the arrow made of, and who made the arrowhead. And furthermore, I want to know what kind of poison is on that arrowhead, and who made that, and so on and so on. He had so many questions. And then the Buddha, he was talking to this man who wasn't able to be mindful. He said, what do you think about that? This guy has so many questions. And the man said, well, he should have that arrow removed right away. Forget about all those questions. Common sense, right? And it's said from that time on, the man who was asking the question immediately began to do meditation, as the Buddha had instructed in the beginning. And eventually he became an arhat. He became an enlightened being. But what can we learn from that parable? That's one question. Right? So, I want to relay some of the things I've learned from my teacher. So in this case of this man who felt, he had so many questions about how can I be mindful, and all of the difficulties in being mindful, that the important thing is now, the moment now. This is really, as I was saying earlier, the objective of Zen practice, to be in the moment now. He realized that rather than thinking about all of the difficulties of how difficult it was to do it and so on, and why he couldn't do it, the important thing was to do it as the Buddha had said, and really concentrate on the moment now. But the question I have for you is it possible to do mindfulness or Zazen in a mistaken way? Is it possible to do it in a mistaken way? And my teacher often said there are some mistakes that can arise in being mindful or trying to be mindful. From the point of view of Zen, of Zazen, the objective of being in the moment now is to let go of the ego. And both Dr. Konsant and Venerable Kongyen have spoken about the need to let go of the ego. Because nowadays there are many books about mindfulness. It's possible to read and try, or podcasts. You can listen to many podcasts, I presume. I've never done such. But I suppose on YouTube and other podcasts. But it's very easy if we're listening to a podcast or reading about Zazen without a teacher to do it in a way that seems most convenient to yourself. In other words, you're going to do it according to your own convenience. But since the object of meditation, of being mindful, and of Zazen is to let go of the ego, if we simply do it according to our own convenience, my question is, will we be able to truly do mindfulness? Or will we end up like the man that I mentioned at the beginning, who wanted to kill the deer, but he lost sight of the deer. He lost sight of how to do it, as the Buddha had explained. So that's one question. The other question is the kind of questions that can come up for such a person. So, I can't do mindfulness like you told me to do. So what should I do then? Or how about people who've been doing it for 10 years, or 20 years, or 30 years, but still aren't mindful? What about these people? The point of Zazen is that if a person is truly sitting and one with their Zazen, then there should be no gap for the ego to enter in. There should be no ideas of the ego entering in. But this is more difficult than we imagine, because it's very easy to think, I'm being mindful, or I'm doing Zazen. But the goal of Zazen, as taught by my teacher, is to be completely one with Zazen. In other words, to eliminate that sense of separation between me and the activity, between me and Zazen. As long as there are two things, that isn't Zazen. The practice of Zazen is to be so completely one with it that we grind up Zazen, that we pulverize it. So as long as I'm doing Zazen, that means we are watching our Zazen. Oh, I'm doing it well, or I'm not doing it well. And this is an example of the person who, chasing the deer, suddenly loses sight. He's beginning to think, am I doing it well? Am I doing it right? Am I doing this and this? The goal of Zazen is simply to be Zazen. For example, as Lee was describing, simply to be the breath. It's not a matter of, am I doing it right or wrong? It's simply to be the thing itself. So in the Zen world, we talk about true mindfulness. True mindfulness is to let go of the self that's being mindful, and simply to be one with that activity. And it doesn't matter if you're sitting, standing, walking, or lying down. My teacher was fond of saying that one of the best ways to do Zazen is simply to warm the cushion. simply to warm the cushion. Everybody now is warming their chair, I believe, without even trying. So this is a way of sitting where you let go. We talk, in Buddhism, as you know, we talk about 6 senses. Seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching. In the West, we only have 5. I've often spoken about this. But in Buddhism, there's one more sense function, right? I think many of you are aware of this, and that is thinking. Thinking. In the West, most people have the sense that I'm thinking, that I'm seeing, that I'm hearing, that I'm doing. But this, from a Buddhist point of view, this sense of I or me is extra. The teaching of Buddhism is that there is no self. There is no self. So if I'm seeing, we're making 2 things. There's the person who's doing this and the person who's perceiving those things. So in this case of sitting where you're just warming the cushion, we're going to let the 6 sense functions work completely naturally. Let them be open. Don't try to control them or arrange them or manipulate them. Just let them seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching. These things work automatically. Nobody had to train themselves to see or hear or smell. Sometimes I give the example of smelling to try and tell your nose, oh, today I'm only going to smell good things. You can't do that. The nose will smell anything in its environment, correct? The nose is simply one with the smells. It doesn't care. It doesn't know if it's good or bad. It's simply one with all of the smells that are around us. So in the same way, hearing, we can hear some, is that the air conditioning? I think it's the air conditioning. We can see, if the eyes are open, see, I can see, I'm not sure what this thing is in front of me. Is that a camera? There's a camera in front of me. I can see faces, smells. It's quite neutral to me in here. Sometimes we have incense in the temple. Taste, not so much. I think we can all feel that we're sitting, because we're all sitting in a chair. Those 5 senses are not so difficult, but thinking, this is the one that gives us the most problem. But please remember this. I think I'm running out of time here. Please remember this. This is something I want you to remember. We can only think one thought at a time. It is impossible to think 2 thoughts at the same time. If you ask a person on the street, how many thoughts can you think at the same time? Oh, maybe 2, 3, but no. From a Buddhist perspective, one thought has to disappear completely before the next thought immediately arises. There is a constant stream of thought, but that one thought is neither good nor bad. But we have the impression that we can see a thought, oh, that's a good thought, or a bad thought, or a neutral thought. I want to tell you, that's the ego. That's the ego. So in this form of sitting, just warming the cushion, warming the chair, warming the pew. I just invite you to imagine that, to leave the sense functions. You're not going to try and control them or make judgments about them. And to leave thought, come and go. That is the way to bring an end to Zazen by doing Zazen. Because if anything is remaining, whether it's mindfulness, Zazen, or or the Dharma, or whatever, the ego remains. Because in Zen practice, I don't know how Fra Nikom, he's probably thinking, I don't know if I go for that. But in the moment now, as I mentioned, we can't think of it. There is only that. Thanks for listening. If you have any questions, let's talk about it as we go upstairs and talk together. Thank you. Thanks for coming.